Africa Continental Free Trade Area Summit wraps up with the mandate to implement 10 years of planning. Delegates have been engaging in Cape Town since Sunday, deliberating on continental trade, localization and digital economic advancements, among other matters. Business reporter Ntokozo Khumalo has been following developments and joins us live now. Ntokozo, before we speak about the role of South Africa, its branding, just an overall picture of what really has encompassed deliberations at this particular summit.
Good morning, Dumisang. Indeed, over the last 2 days, delegates from around the continent have been delegating around ways to actually implement the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And amongst the topics is obviously dissecting those priority sectors, including agriculture and manufacturing, pharmaceutical industry and so on. But what is starting to also come out is how we can really build on brand Africa, the reputation of the continent, which also has to do a lot with our cultures and making sure that we understand the culture across the continent and really build one brand. And to help give more insights on how we can get there, I am now joined by Tebe Ikafeleng, who is the founder and CEO of Brand Africa. Thank you for talking to us. It's symbolic that we hear the waters leading to the harbour, and obviously we are talking about Africa trade. What is the role of really building Africa's reputation to get the ball rolling in this free trade area?
Well, I think what's important, what you said about the symbolism of this place, it's what our Minister Patel opened with in terms of the importance of Cape Town, or really how Cape Town itself was started as a trade as a trade port, and speaking to for Cape Town to be what it is now represents collaborations, partnerships, the importance of trade and relationships across the world. Of course, then it was from India to Cape Town. But the importance of AfCFTA on why we're here and why we should be doing this is, you look at, for example, Brand Africa 100, the most admired brands in Africa. Only 80% of the brands that Africans admire are from Africa. So one of the critical discussions that were made in this forum the last 2 days, and perhaps on to the next, is the idea of a made in Africa label, the idea of a standardization, the idea of raising the quality of African products to be able to compete, because there's nothing wrong with having global brands in Africa, but it's also important for African brands to be able to continue to compete. And that's also the discussion about the rules of origin, to ensure that Africa doesn't become a dumping ground for non-African brands. So this forum is important. It's a fundamental point in our history as a continent for the realization of AfCFTA, to be able to build great African brands.
And obviously African brands, there's always a story, and African brands always have a story to it. What is the importance of some of the softer side of things, culture, understanding our differences and so on within building that brand Africa? How important is that a South African understands and respects a Kenyan's culture, and we actually draw really creativity and so on from that?
Well, you're beginning to see, for example, in South Africa, a brand like Ntokozo, which is founded in South Africa out of the culture, the Xhosa heritage. But what's important about that particular brand is the appreciation, not just in South Africa, but beyond the South African borders, not just in Africa, but internationally, because it underlines an important part about building great brands which are founded, which are distinctive, in that we as Africans are not going to be able to compete with the Indians on being India, with the Americans of being America, or the Italians of being Italian. What we can do different and better is us as Africans to compete on what makes us distinctive and different. And our culture is one of the most beautiful cultures, not just as a country, South Africa, but also as a continent collectively. The vibrancy of our culture has to be able to manifest in the products and the ideas that we bring forward to the world, because that's how we are going to compete. That's how we're going to differentiate ourselves in the world, because otherwise we just copycats, and Africa is not a copycat continent.
And just quickly, what do you hope? It is the last day of the business forum today. Just as wrapping up, what would be your key takeaways that you really hope all the delegates that are there take forward as part of driving that implementation of the free trade area agreement.
Well, what definitely has been discussed is the idea that it takes over 110 borders to move goods around the continent. It takes around 55 land borders, if you will, and it takes about 54 borders, air borders, to move around the continent. We need to liberalize the airways. We need to open up the borders a bit more. So I think what has been fundamental about this conference the last 2 days is the importance as well of the private sector. So on the public sector perspective, the public sector role is to opening up these borders to make it easy for goods to be able to move. And on the private sector, the important part of the private sector, because governments don't build brands. Governments create policies and an enabling environment to be able to, for these brands to thrive. And then that's where the private sector comes in. And that's why this AfCFTA it's a private sector driven initiative. And it's important for us, if we're going to build a brand South Africa, a brand Africa, a brand Nigeria, or any other national brand, to be able to trade with each other on equal terms and to be able to move from one country to another and to be able to ensure that we are building a great continent. I'm taking one thing out of this continent. There's a momentum, there's an excitement about where this continent is going, and there's opportunity for African businesses, there's opportunity for brand South Africa and for brand Africa collectively.
Tebe, thank you so much for talking to us this morning. Of course, Brand Africa founder and CEO Tebe Ikalafeng just talking us through his key takeaways from this 2.5-day business forum, saying that there is momentum on the continent. There is huge opportunities, and it really is about the business or the private and public sector actually working together to liberalize those markets so that those opportunities can really be untapped. Dumisang.
You can expect more on the final day of that event, the Africa Free Continental Trade Summit out in Cape Town from Ntokozo Khumalo as the day progresses. Now,